Well, with businesses globally vying for African opportunity to ramp up growth, the spotlight gets thrown on the business planning approach because the truth is it's no easy feat setting up shop and conquering African markets. Val Nichas, who's a business strategist at VBN Consultants, joins me now in studio to take a closer look at models that have reaped success and lessons to be learned from some of the pitfalls. Thanks so much, Val, for joining us in studio today. Well, some of the pitfalls have arisen from the fact that businesses have often ventured into the African market with a copy and paste approach, and that's really ineffective because we're not looking at the African continent as a homogeneous entity. So with heightened attention on the continent right now, how much more discerning have investors become?
Okay. Hi, Alishia. Good to be here. Yes, I think it does require a slight different thought process for brands, and I think probably the brands that are more established are the ones that are more difficult to adapt to these new environments. So before I talk about some of the operational challenges that brands face when they enter markets in Africa, probably the biggest thing they've got to look at is the consumer. So we know that a product works or certain brands established, but it's important for that brand to be aware of the consumer insights of that local market. So you might have a tried and tested brand that's worked everywhere, but you arrive in a country where perhaps the palate is a bit spicier, or perhaps they're looking for something a little bit more adventurous. And I think brands sometimes can be arrogant to think it'll just work, and they need to maybe adapt that menu mix, maybe not change it fundamentally, but adapt it to suit the local market. So I think the customer focus is probably one of the most key issues to look at. And we know that there have been some entrants in the market and they've exited within 2-3 years because they haven't really listened to the customer. I'm a firm believer that businesses generally fail, first of all, because there's no cash flow, but more importantly, because they're not actually listening to their consumer. And then on the operational side, I think the challenges that some of the QSR brands certainly face are things like store development. So, for example, in a country like Nigeria and a lot of the African countries, you might not have the skill set, so your workmanship probably isn't the best you can get. So that presents challenges. You might have to do shop fitting externally and bring it in, which obviously presents additional costs. And then there are the usual challenges of just resources and management and skill set.
Let's take a look at that hurdle more closely, because for majority of the players there's the infrastructure challenge that they've got to face: lack of power, stock issues, import costs on goods which cannot be produced locally as well. These are contributing factors to Woolies, for example, having exited the Nigerian market. So how are issues like that being overcome right now?
Okay. Yes, there is a lot of legislation, so there's certain imports that can't happen, so you have to produce them internally, which always says there's not always that choice. But on an upside, I think what that does do is force the country to look at entrepreneurial spirit and look at new industries and new businesses. So even though it is a bit difficult for the people coming in, it does allow for opportunity within the country.
For the company, how do they weigh up cost against opportunity? Because of course setting up shop comes at this cost, or do they have to weigh it up against the cost of not venturing and taking hold of the opportunity?
Well, I think you're probably going to have to do the assessment to say, if I want to be in business, these are the issues and how am I going to face them. Otherwise there'd probably be no business. So you'll just have a lot more pressure on getting your turnovers up because those ratios are a lot higher. Just to give you an example, in Nigeria, if we take a typical QSR store, let's say about 180 square meters, in South Africa that would cost about 1.8 to 2 million, let's say. If we work it out in Nairas, it would be equivalent to about 3 times that, it's about 6.2 million. So that just shows you the extreme expense in setting up shop. So to get the ratios right, you probably just got to get more feet into your stores and get your turnovers up. Otherwise, it won't make sense. But
what about employing a local partner? Because that's a strategy that some businesses have employed, as opposed to going through that entire greenfield investment.
Yes. So I'm working with a local company, Chicken Republic, which is a homegrown brand. And I would say, and my advice to anyone entering any African country is you definitely need the local partner, without a doubt. I think you need the local partner, because it also provides opportunity for the individual locally. I think secondly, they've got a lot more insight. I don't think you can arrive there thinking you know the country. I certainly don't claim to know it as well as they do. So local partner in terms of insights into the country, in terms of contacts, in terms of just understanding how things are done there. I would say it's a prerequisite. I wouldn't recommend.
What's your assessment of the competitive landscape? Because just over the quarter of 2014
yes.
that's done, we've heard famous brands, Domino Pizza via Taste Holdings,
yes.
and then even Burger King venturing in more aggressively, or certainly thinking about more aggressive entry of the African market. So what's your assessment of the playing field right now?
Okay. Well, in business, I think we generally are faced with changing landscape, and we've got to be watching whether that change is changing consumer, changing economy, changing legislation. And competitive change is probably the biggest reason why companies have to re-energize or reinvent their brands, is because suddenly they've had market share and now there's a bit of pressure. So if I were to take Nigeria, yes, there has been change, and Chicken Republic's been quite fortunate because they're 10 years old this year and they've had a good lead. And now you do see KFC, you see Domino's, not many stores, but they certainly are there. And I think all it does when that happens, I think competition is good, even though we don't like it when it happens. It forces us to study our brand, be sure that we have got a unique proposition, polish up a little bit, because sometimes we get a bit slack, you know, when there aren't many competitors. So I think the competitive situation is only just starting there. I think it's going to get bigger.
Let's leave it there. Thanks so much, Val, for having joined us in studio. Val Nichas is a business strategist at VBN Consultants. And that's all we have time for this week. You can catch Africa Business Today every Friday at 5:30 and 8:30 p.m. And remember, you can get a repeat of the show on our website, bdtv.co.za. Until next time, goodbye.